Inequities in life. We are to accept the fact that life on this earth is often unfair and unjust, even for godly believers. Here's Gene.
This principle emerges right here from chapter 7 and chapter 8 in Ecclesiastes, but it's interesting that at the opening of the chapter 7, we have some very, very wise sayings. Solomon drops them in here, and they're very wise sayings. They're good sayings. For example, a good name is better than perfume. I think all of us would agree. Perfume is rather fragile and fleeting. And if you have a good name, that is certainly much better than something that is lasting than fleeting. He said, "It is better to listen to rebuke from a wise person than to listen to the song of fools." As I read that, I thought to myself, Solomon, why didn't you practice that? You know, it's one thing to make statements, even true statements. And Solomon made a lot of them. Great statements, writing the book of Proverbs. The problem is he had trouble practicing what he was preaching. There's a lesson in that in itself, I think, for every one of us. He said, "Don't let your spirit rush to be angry, for anger abides in the heart of fools." Well, that's a powerful statement, and it's very, very wise. But after outlining a few of these positive statements, it seems like he regresses right back into what I've called the inequities in life, to summarize what he said. And this really bothered him. And, you know, to be honest, it should bother any one of us, because we can't figure all of it out in terms of fairness or justness. But here's what he wrote: "In my futile life, I have seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in spite of his righteousness." He said, that doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem just. Well, I think we agree. Life is not fair. And we know, of course, a lot of it is because of sin that exists in the world, that impacts everybody. He went on to say, "And there is a wicked man who lives long in spite of his evil." Well, we've seen that. And when you juxtapose that against the first statement, life does seem to be unfair. He goes on again to underscore just a little bit more here. "There's a futility that is done on the earth. There are righteous people who get what the actions of the wicked deserve." Whoa. I think we look around us today and we see some of that. "And there are wicked people who get what the actions of the righteous deserve. I say that this too is futile." The good things happen to them. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. And he said it's unjust, it's unfair. That bothers me. It bothers me too. That's an area that troubles all of us, because this is certainly a result of sin in the world and being unable to understand completely life that exists in this world. Now, Solomon's response to that, though, is very, very interesting. And he came again to earthly conclusions. "What do I do with this?" he said. Well, avoid extremes. That's the terminology I've used to summarize what he said. He said, "Don't be excessively righteous and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself?" Now, I think there's some commentators, in fact, I know there's some commentators that say that he is not saying that you should go ahead and sin. Well, if you look at his whole life and how Solomon lived it and the choices he made and devoted his mind to pleasure, I don't think there's any way to really avoid the fact that he is simply saying that if you're going to sin, don't sin excessively. And if you're going to be wise, don't be overly wise. Don't burn yourself out trying to solve all of life's problems, because you're just not going to solve them. He says avoid extremes. And then he said, so, what do I do in view of that conclusion? Well, Ecclesiastes 8:15, eat, drink, enjoy yourself. Comes right back again to that conclusion. So I commended enjoyment because there's nothing better for man under the sun except to eat, drink, and enjoy himself. He came back basically to what else is there to do to resolve this tension and this unfairness except enjoy yourself. For this will accompany him in his labor during the days of his life that God gives him under the sun. And in essence, there's truth to that because there is blessing in what God gives us for our physical bodies and the pleasures of life. But once again, I think we see that he lacks perspective in relationship to life and eternal values. Now, if Solomon means don't go to extremes, if he means trusting God because he's sovereign, that's a different story. In other words, when we look at this unfairness, we can say that God is sovereign, he is in control. And I'm not going to go to the extreme of trying to figure it all out because it's beyond me. If that's what he means, he's basically saying what Paul said, don't be anxious about anything, but by everything with your prayers, let your supplications be known to the Lord, and the peace of God will guard your heart and your mind. In essence, he would be saying even more applicational, I think, would be Romans 8:28. When he said, Paul wrote, that all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, those who are called according to his purpose. And we find that that's even difficult to apply when we really don't understand the bad things that are happening to us, and there doesn't seem to be a reason for it. If that's what he means by don't going to an extreme, then I think it's certainly a biblical truth. But I don't think that's exactly what Solomon's talking about. I think he's thinking with an earthly perspective. And I think he's saying from his experience of devoting himself to every pleasure on earth, and he said, I set my mind to that. In essence, in context, it seems he's saying back off of that too, because it's not going to get you anywhere. Just be balanced. Well, I think what we have here is another distortion, limited perspective, and thankfully we have the whole New Testament concept to be able to put all of this Old Testament history and story into proper perspective. Take Paul's experiences, for example, in terms of suffering. He said this when he wrote to Timothy. He's now in a dungeon when he wrote this. He's going to die. He knows that. And he says, but you, Timothy, have followed my teaching, conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love, and endurance, along with the persecutions and suffering that came to me in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. And you remember what happened to him first time he came to Lystra? He was stoned and carried outside of the city and left for dead. And some believe, by the way, even though God raised him up, he went back into the city, continued his missionary journeys, that as a result of being stoned in that particular situation, that perhaps that's where he had problems with his eyes, could not see properly. But we also know that he had so many beatings over the process of time. He was whipped, he was beaten, and certainly that affected him and even his appearance. And so when he says, what persecutions I endured, Paul knew what he was talking about. Yet the Lord rescued me from them all. Doesn't mean he delivered me from it happening, but he rescued me. He's saying when I was in Lystra, the Lord brought me back, and I was able to go on. It was a miracle. And then he goes on to say, in fact, all those who want to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. At some point, in our lives. We're very fortunate, by the way, in the culture in which many of us have grown up, is that persecution is minimal compared with what happened in the New Testament world and in other parts of the world today. Because he goes on to state that evil people and impostors will become worse, deceiving and being deceived. And all we need to do is look around us in the world in which we live today to see how evil is increasing. And that's really basically the direction of the human race when you look at the whole of society and history. Though we've lived in a window, as it were, a little window in our culture where we've been relatively free from this. But that's not the story, the human story of suffering. James addressed the issue when he said, "Consider it great joy, my brothers." And there he's not talking about great elation, jumping up and down and saying, "Lord, send more." It's a deep, settled peace. "Consider it a great joy, my brothers, whenever you experience various trials, knowing the testing of your faith produces endurance, but endurance must do its complete work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." And one of the great comforts, I think, when we're facing problems like that is to see some meaning in it, and the meaning that perhaps we need to think about the most is that we can learn and we can mature and draw closer to God, even though it's a painful experience. But that's really Romans 8:28 in action, seeing purpose. The reflection response question, what examples can you give where you have observed injustice toward others? Wow. Should we try to enumerate that through the Reformation period, through all the suffering that people went through? A Tyndale who was burned at the stake because he translated the Bible into English. Others who have suffered. You look about us today, what's happening. There are Christians, as I speak, that are being put to death because they believe in Jesus Christ, or they will not convert to some other kind of religious system. It's happening. It's happening. And so we come back to this principle. We're to accept the fact that life on this earth is often unfair and unjust, even for godly believers. But if we want to round out the story, we have that wonderful hope that if you destroy our body here, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. That's our hope in Jesus Christ.